Ahead now. We're recording.
Welcome, friends. Today we have a talk on the philosophy and teachings of Pythagoras, followed by at 12:05 p.m. with a continuation of our study of light on the path. Next Sunday, we will continue your Google Meet our study of the key to theosophy. The Declaration of Unity.
The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. And today's devotional reading is from the Voice of the Silence, starting on page 19. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots as the fulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate, like the sun sparks, light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not change, will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the air, however eager at the initial stage. Unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. Unless thou seest, thou canst not hear. To hear and see, this is the second stage. When the disciple sees and hears, and when he smells and tastes, eyes closed, ears shut, with mouth and nostrils stopped, when the four senses blend and ready to pass into the fifth, that of the inner touch, then into stage the fourth, he has passed on. And in the fifth stage, of thy thoughts, all these again have to kill beyond animation. And the fundamental propositions.
Okay, there are three fundamental propositions taken from The Secret Doctrine, written by Madame Blavatsky. And the first one is that there is an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle that is the basis of the universe and everything. This principle, speculation upon it is impossible because it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought. In the words of Mondukia, unthinkable and unspeakable. What this postulates is that there's one absolute reality, this principle, which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. And this infinite and eternal cause is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. So it is called beingness rather than being, and as said, is beyond the range and reach of thought. The second fundamental proposition is that the universe, the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane is periodically the playground of numberless universes, incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and the sparks of eternity. And what this essentially is saying is that there are cycles, from very, very large cycles up to the manifestation of the universe, down to very, very small cycles, which we can see in day and night, life and death, and in all departments of nature. There is no point where there is not this law of cycles. The third fundamental proposition is that the identity of every soul is with that of the universal oversoul, and the universal oversoul itself is an aspect of the unknown root. And what this postulates is that there is an obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycle of incarnation or necessity in accordance with cycles and karma. It essentially states that no oversoul can be without passing through every form, from the elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara, and then acquires individuality first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, and thus can ascend through all the degrees of intelligence from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, a Dhyani Buddha. So it basically states that there are no privileges or special gifts in man save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit through a long series of reincarnations. And that concludes the fundamental propositions.
Okay, let me share my screen first. Yeah, are you able to see my screen?
It's coming up now. Yeah, it's up.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good morning, friends, and welcome to our short talk on the philosophy and teachings of Pythagoras. So when we think about Pythagoras, what comes to the mind of the general public is mathematics, and to a limited number of academics, a philosopher. But we are taught in theosophy that Pythagoras was not merely a mathematician or a philosopher in the common sense of the word, but also a teacher of the Heart Doctrine, and initiate was taught by the masters of India. He is most likely one of the most famous Greek philosophers, and is said to have imparted his teachings verbally, which were then transcribed by his contemporaries, including Plato, Aristotle, and several other disciples. So in order to set the stage, we should clearly state that Pythagoras was deeply interested in the metaphysical nature of numericals, which transcend the common understanding of even the most advanced mathematicians. He taught the method of deduction, which proceeds from universals to particulars, a method employed by his disciples. The cosmological theory of numerals, which Pythagoras learned from the Egyptian hierophants, is alone able to reconcile the two units, matter and spirit, and cause each to demonstrate the other mathematically. The sacred numbers of the universe in their esoteric combination solve the great problem and explain the theory of radiation and the cycle of emanations. HPB in Isis Unveiled refers to Pythagoras as a pure philosopher, the deeply versed in the profounder phenomena of nature, the noble inheritor of the ancient lore, whose great aim was to free the soul from the fetters of sense and force it to realize its powers, must live eternally in human memory. Further, HPB states that the solution of the great problem of eternity belongs neither to religious superstition nor gross materialism. The harmony and mathematical equiformity of the double evolution, spiritual and physical, are elucidated only in the universal minds numericals of Pythagoras, who built his system entirely upon the so-called metrical speech of the Hindu Vedas. The identity of the Pythagorean and the Brahmanical systems become evident from the translations of the Rig Veda and the Aitreya Brahmana. So let's just take a quick look at his early life and then what ended up being a 40-year journey of learning. So Pythagoras was born on the island of Samos around 570 BCE, and prior to his birth, we are told that his father received a prophecy that a son was to be born to him who would be a great teacher of great learning and would become known for his virtue and wisdom. His contemporaries state that young Pythagoras was a man of deep learning and wisdom, and by the time he was in his late teens, he had exhausted all possibilities of learning in his hometown, including all his tutors. So he was then advised to leave his home and become a disciple of several learned priests and hierophants in Egypt. So with this advice, he set out to seek these philosophers and masters, and this journey lasted almost 40 years. He first met Thales, who advised him to travel to Egypt to study under several wise priests. So Pythagoras first traveled to Sidon, where he was initiated into the mysteries of Tyre and Bablos. He then traveled to the mainland of Egypt, where Thales took him under his wings. For the next 22 years, Pythagoras spent time in deep study of mathematics, astronomy, and music before finally being initiated into the Egyptian mysteries. The invasion of Egypt by Cambyses led to the imprisonment of Pythagoras, who was sent to Babylon. However, Pythagoras saw this as an opportunity and quickly settled down to study under the Magi for the next 12 years. At the end of this period, he was initiated into the Chaldean mysteries. Following his initiation, he traveled through what is then known as Persia and then to India, where he finally encountered the pure source of Eastern wisdom and was taught by the Brahmin masters. This was barely a century after Buddha and revival of the ancient wisdom. It is very evident from Pythagoras' philosophy that he came under the direct influence of Buddha's teachings. This is also evident in the similarities between the Pythagorean and the Buddhist systems. We are told that during his stay in India, he was initiated into the mysteries and emerged as a teacher or adept. During his stay in India, which lasted almost 20 years, he was revered as a guru and a father and was referred to as Yavanacharya, the Ionian philosopher. At the age of 56, he returned to his homeland of Samos and discovered a profound change in the culture and mindset of the inhabitants. And it turns out that he could recruit just one disciple. And so in contrast to his reverence in India, in his homeland, he was unable to recruit more individuals or have people even listen to him. And so making no progress to impart his wisdom in Samos, he and a few disciples traveled to the town of Crotona, in the ancient Magna Graecia in southern Italy. So years where he then established the Pythagorean school at Crotona. So upon settling in Crotona, Pythagoras founded his school around the year 530 BCE. Crotona was one of the two most flourishing cities of southern Italy, renowned for its temples, for its Doric constitution, for its athletes and victorious in Olympic Games, for its medical schools. The Sybarites owed their immortality to the reputation of luxury and effeminacy, but the Crotonites, on the other hand, so rich in moral qualities, would perhaps have been forgotten if it had not been for the asylum which they had the glory of having offered to the great schools of esoteric philosophy. The school not only may be considered as the mother of the later Platonic school, but also as an archetypal of all idealistic fraternities that followed it. So Pythagoras, upon arrival at Crotona, began publicly to announce his teachings and discourses, and he won immediate sympathy from many of his hearers. So in other words, it seems as though Crotona was more predisposed to his philosophy and teachings than his own hometown. He taught an entire emerging community seeking almost 400 pure souls who might constitute a small brotherhood for the sake of making the polis a city of souls in the search of wisdom. His school was based upon the most stringent rules for admission, including a probation lasting 5 years and a requirement of total silence in the presence of those in the assembly who had been longer in the school. He initiated those who had passed all the preliminary trials, making themselves, quote-unquote, channels of the divine fount of omniscience, towards which he always pointed and upon which he enjoined an absolute reverence. So what was crucial for Pythagoras was authenticity of self-knowledge in relation to the application for the sake of other men of holy, sacred teaching. The point could not be grasped. The monad and duad could not be understood completely unless they were also in terms of the triad. In all of these put together, something has involved, which is rather squaring the circle, securing the elixir of life, and the key to mysteries of life and death. All human beings have a unique and privileged access to the verbum, which is the inner sanctuary of their own consciousness in deep sleep, in daily meditation, in waking life, in golden moments. Above all, when they do this, they will begin to transcend as the sacred and a number of numericals. So, let me just. So what Pythagoras is trying to do at this stage is also form a link between numericals and his philosophy and try to make his students understand that nature and philosophy are purely mathematical. The wise take this into account in advance, thereby preserving the inviolable image of what Pythagoras has called the perfect number. The criteria of the world which accommodate the concerns of the mediocre also act as a brake upon the ascent to those levels of excellence which revered to all teachers. So I'm going to skip this. So like all great teachers, Pythagoras pursued two forms of teaching. One public or exoteric, and the other private or esoteric to his inner circle. So we are taught that his teachings prevailed, wherever his teachings prevailed, there was sobriety, temperance, displaced luxury, for the distinguished Pythagoreans were men of great uprightness, consciousness, and self-control, capable of devoted and enduring friendships. So what we are taught is, wherever teachings of Pythagoras prevailed, in those environments, or in that society, a lot of materialism and earthly living were displaced and replaced with devotion and spiritual learning. So the exoteric teachings of Pythagoras consisted principally of practical morals of the purest and the most spiritual type, and emphasized the virtues of self-restraint, reverence, patriotism, sincerity, consciousness, uprightness, truth, justice, and purity of heart. He insisted upon the highest ideals of marriage and of parental duties, and always exerted his influence to suppress wars and dissensions. He was the first to apply the term philosophy, or lover of wisdom of truth to himself, as a substitute for the earlier term sage. And this is what he said, that the deity only is wise, men at best are merely lovers of wisdom. He was also the first to use the term cosmos, or order, as applied to the universe. And so he often said that drunkenness is synonymous with ruin. No one ought to exceed the proper quantity of meat and drink. Strength of mind depends upon sobriety, for this keeps the reason undiverted by passion. And once he was asked a question, may I indulge in pleasures of passion? And his response was, whenever you wish to be weaker than yourself. He also said that never say or do anything in anger, and virtue is harmony, health, the universal good. He urges peoples not to kill animals because he declared that they have a right to live as well as men. At some more exoteric points here, he stated that it is the part of a fool to attend to every opinion of all men, above all to that of the mob. Do what you believe to be right, whatever people think of you. Despise alike their censure and their praise. Add not unto your grit by discontent. Do not speak few things in many words, but many things in few words. Either be silent or speak words better than silence. It is hard to take many paths in life at the same time. Men should associate with one another in such a way as not to make their friends enemies, but to make their enemies friends. We ought to wage war only against the ignorance of the mind, the passions of the heart, the distempers of the body, sedition in cities, and ill will in families. No man should deem anything exclusively his own, and every man ought to train himself to be worthy of belief without an oath. So in many ways, he was using his exoteric teachings to help the general public purify their minds and prepare themselves to receive more spiritual knowledge. And then a few more points on his exoteric teachings. He goes on to say that man is at his best when he visits the temples of the gods. And here, keep in mind that in ancient times, temples were places of higher learning. They were like lodges and not structures for just baseless worship. A man should never pray for anything for himself because he's ignorant of what is really good for him. The noblest gifts of heaven to man are to speak the truth and to do good. These two things resemble the works of the deity. Place intuition as the best charioteer or guide of thy acts. And this is also taught in the Gita. Possess not treasures except those things which no one can take from you. Be sleepless in the things of the spirit, for sleep in them is akin to death. Each of us is a soul, not a body, which is only a possession of the soul. So, there are plenty more in-depth points of extratic teachings, but these are some points that he covered on as preparing for those to receive better knowledge. And so for the inner circle, he had what he called teachings which are more esoteric, and these were highly in the form of symbols or numericals or music. And he also taught about the inner meaning of man and the earth and universe. So we'll cover a few points of his teaching. So two examples are, he goes on to say that do not offer your right hand lightly. And what he's implying is refrain from pursuing earthly passions associated with the lower personality. Do not devour your brain. And what this means is refrain from idle thought. Do not stir fire with a sword, meaning do not seek retribution. Hate is only overcome by love, and this is law eternal. And these are words also in the Dhammapada by Buddha. Turn away yourself from every sharp edge, and this implies self-restraint. Do not look in a mirror by lamplight, implying seek guidance from your inner light and refrain from fanciful thought. When the winds blow, give heed unto the sound, meaning listen closely to the still small voice of our inner deity. He goes on to say, do not offer your right hand lightly, meaning be sincere, do not make promises you cannot keep, and do not divulge the mysteries to the uninitiated. Leaving the public ways, walk in unfrequented paths, refrain from worldly desires, and lead a spiritual life. Speak not about Pythagorean concerns without light, which means that do not make fanciful assumptions of you being a teacher until thou art a student first. When treading the path, do not divide not. It means do not incorporate falsehood to the divine truth. Above all, learn to govern your tongue when you follow the gods, meaning master the power and the voice of the silence. So Pythagoras taught the disciples that God is the universal mind diffused through all things, and that the mild mind, by the sole virtue of its universal sameness, could be communicated from one object to another and be made to create all things by the sole willpower of man. Every sentence of Pythagoras, like most of the ancient maxims, has a dual significance. And while it had an occult physical meaning expressed literally in words, it always embodied a moral precept. Pythagoras taught that the entire universe is one vast system of mathematically correct combinations. Plato shows the deity geometrizing, and the world is sustained by the same law of equilibrium and harmony upon which it was built. The centripetal force could not manifest itself without the centrifugal force in the harmonious revolutions of the spheres. All forms are the product of the dual force in nature. And thus, to illustrate in our case, we may designate the spirit as the centrifugal and the soul as the centripetal force, spiritual energies. And when in produce one results a disruption, break or damage in the centripetal motion of the earthly soul tending toward the center which attracts it, arrest is progress by clogging it with the heavier weight of matter. So in other words, when centripetal and centrifugal force are in disharmony, that leads to disruption. And the harmony of the whole, which was its life, is destroyed. And individual life can only be continued if sustained by this twofold harmonious force. We'll cover a few more esoteric teachings of Pythagoras. On imagination, he asked, what is imagination? So Pythagoras, psychologists tell us that it is the plastic or the creative power of the soul, but materialists confound it with fancy. The radical difference between the two, however, so thoroughly was indicated by Wordsworth in preference in his lyrical ballads that it is no longer excusable to interchange the words. Imagination, Pythagoras maintained to be the remembrance of the precedent spiritual, mental, and physical states, while fanciful thinking is the disorderly production of the material brain. On the soul, Pythagoras said the soul is a self-moving unit with three elements, and he classified them as the nous, the friend, and the thumos. He said that the latter two, the friend and the thumos, are part of the lower self, the brute side of man, and only the former, the nous, being his essential self. So the charge that he taught, and he was also charged with teaching transmutation, and he taught no more than what Buddha taught, whatever the popular superstition of the Hindu rabble made it after his death. So Pythagoras also taught that a point corresponds to a production of unity. So point is used esoterically in many Eastern scriptures too. And he said that a line of 2 and a superficial of 3, a solid of 4. He defined the point as a monad having the position and the beginning of all things. A line was thought to correspond with duality because it was produced by the first motion from the indivisible nature and formed the junction of 2 points. A superficies was compared to the number 3 because it is the first of all causes that are found in figures. For a circle, which is the principle of all round figures, comprises the triad in the center, but a triangle, which is the first of all rectangular figures, is included in a ternary and receives its form according to that number, and was considered by Pythagoras to be the creator of all sublunary things. The 4 points at the base of the Pythagorean triangle correspond with a solid or cube, which combines the principles of length, breadth, thickness. And so, in essence, what Pythagoras is trying to do is point out that that esoteric philosophy is again purely mathematical in nature, and that mathematics is not what the common public are accustomed to. So Pythagoras held that the number 12 was very sacred. He said that the dodecahedron is a perfect number. It is one of the signs of the zodiac, that the sun visits in 12 months, and it is to honor the sign of the Moses divided his nation into 12 tribes, established 12 cakes, and placed 12 precious stones upon the ephod of pontiffs. So again, we're just touching on some of the numerical teachings of Pythagoras, and that could be maybe covered in more detail in a different talk. So what we'll do towards the end is we'll just cover some of his golden verses. There are several, there are almost 70 or more, and we'll just touch on a few of these. So he says that first worship the immortal gods as the law ordains. He says, reverence thy oath, and next the illustrious heroes. Honor also thy parents and those nearly related to thee, of other men, make them thy friend, who is the most distinguished by virtue. Listen to his kind words and copy his good deeds. Do not hate thy friend for a small fault. Do not neglect the health of thy body, and always be moderate in food and drink and exercise. And finally, we'll touch a few more. He says, accustom thyself to a style of living which is simple but not luxurious. Avoid anything that can cause envy. Moderation in all things is most excellent. Examine thyself. If thou hast done evil, blame, and if thou hast done well, rejoice. He says, never sleep before going over the acts of thy mind, and this is also known as a Pythagorean nightly review, which we should all practice. Take the supreme mind as thy guide, which must ever direct and restrain thy course. And finally, thou shalt be a God, immortal and incorruptible. So we'll wind up with this and open up the stage for any questions and contributions. Thank you. Yes.
He started out talking about Pythagoras did numerals and things like that. Does that relate to the Jewish religion? There's a lot of numbers in there too. It relates to the alphabet. Things they all have a number.
So, and maybe we can cover that in a separate talk, because that's a totally different field by itself. Okay. And yes, it's related to, so a lot of what the student learned from researching on Pythagoras is that many of the ancient languages, Sanskrit, as well as those used by the ancient Jews and Chaldeans, is actually numerical in nature. And so the symbols that and the languages actually are mathematical. And what Pythagoras taught was that without understanding the true numerical nature of the hidden words, hidden meaning in those words, it's really hard to grasp the true inner meaning. So yes, maybe we can do that in a separate talk, but certainly the ancient teachings of Jews are very numerical in nature. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Why do you think he required silence of the students in front of the teachers?
So this appears to be a tradition through almost every lodge, whether it's in Greece or in the Middle East, like the city of Alexandria, or in India, the Asian or Persia. And what they say is that every neophyte must listen first, must understand, ask, and then practice. So we kind of, in the Voice of the Silence, Dhammapada, he talks about, he listens about the student as going through 3 stages. He listens, he understands, he applies. So and throughout his, so during research, this student primarily looked at Pythagoras' teachings in the light of theosophy. There's a ton of it outside. And he valued silence greatly, the inner contemplation, to understand the deep meaning behind every word, to be able to unveil every word and understand what is beneath the word, beneath the sentence. Once you understand, then ask a question. So he is trying to get across as saying, know what you ask, know the inner meaning before you ask about it. So it's a very valuable teaching that all of us should apply ourselves to.
Yeah, I also noticed in your presentation something about when the teacher's ready, the student appears. We usually have that reversed. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. But it stands to reason anyone isn't ready to teach if there isn't a qualified student. So the reciprocity of that maxim is interesting that you highlighted that.
Absolutely, and that really caught my eye too. And it seems to me what he's trying to get across is that don't fancy yourself to be really well versed in philosophy until you have reached a point, until you've been a student for a long time. And you know, being a student, if you look at some of the Mahatma letters, being a student itself is a continuous process, because even the masters themselves are chelas of more advanced masters. So he's trying to put that in perspective, you know, and says when you when you're ready to teach, but you cannot be ready until you've been a master, I mean a student for a while. So.
And that includes applying the philosophy. You can't just one
Yes.
or the other.
Yes.
You need to have both. It seems like this philosophy is totally based on what you just said. You talked about the Pythagoras and the points he made. That's all that I can relate to is in the teachings of philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you look at his, a lot of so Pythagoras never wrote anything, at least as far as we know. So a lot of his teachings were transcribed by his disciples, including Plato, Aristotle, and all the way to Hypatia. So it is hard to know that over many centuries, almost 1,000 years, they actually maintained those teachings without losing it. So Pythagoras, he came into being only a century after Buddha was around, and that's why he picked up the Eastern knowledge. But he was initiated throughout different lodges in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Persia, and all his teachings were through discourses. He had public discourse in Crotona as well as in the school itself, both exoteric and esoteric. But it was his students and their students and disciples that maintained this the purity of his teachings through many centuries.
It sounds very much like Plato was a student of
yes, Plato, Aristotle, and if you look at some of how they deduct deductions, right? It was Pythagoras who taught to reason from universals to particulars, not go other way around, right? That is something we are taught in theosophy as well. And Plato and Aristotle really expanded on that. And if you look at the Platonic thought, it's based a lot in Plato also taught numerical principles too, as relate to spiritual. And even in that, they used the method of reasoning from universal to particulars.
Right now, we're also taught to do that, go from universals to particulars.
Mm-hmm.
But then to go from particulars to universal with that in mind. Is that part of the Pythagoras' teachings as well?
So the ancient Hermetic phrase, right, as above, so below, and vice versa. There are elements of that too. And if you look at his esoteric thought process, he does talk about first understanding from universals to particulars as a way to really understand the deity within yourself. And what he said is that without really grasping the deity, in turn, you cannot really understand the universal mind and the absolute principle that we are taught.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's interesting the character of this teacher came through the expression initially or primarily through mathematics, which suggests, a very systematized, not in a bad way, but that everything could be applied with such precision. That these universals come down to particulars, and that his mode of living, I guess of all the teachers like Plato and so forth, they all required, things like silence or knowledge of music or mathematics, but their mode of living helped, make these applications real, help connect the lower with the higher, it seems like. It's just so interesting that it came about primarily through a mathematical framework.
Yeah, I mean, it is, so when Pythagoras traveled to Egypt, because even early on in his life, he was known for a child of very deep learning. And so, he had all his tutors and other, schools he could learn from. But by the time he was teen, he pretty much exhausted at least whatever he could learn or gain from his immediate hometown. And so he went to Egypt, and there he was really immersed in mathematics, astronomy, music, and how that relates to the mysteries. So that's why, and one of his first initiations was in Egypt into the mysteries. He seemed to make, if you look at Sacred Doctrine and a few other writings, it was at that point in time we started making connections between between meditation, mathematics, and symbols. And he was able to demonstrate that in the purest form, they're all interconnected and they all lead one to the other. And there's almost an unbroken line of understanding between those. And he put numericals at the top, by making really clear that every aspect of evolution, starting from the emanation, right, starting from the great breath, is purely mathematical nature. And he was able to demonstrate that throughout his teachings.
Oh, go ahead, Carolina.
No, maybe your thought is related to what you're saying. I'll go after.
Oh, just a comment that the mysteries were originally like a play. They had actors and music, and it incorporated a lot of these elements, whereas we usually think of it as some sort of meditation or a different type of learning. But the mysteries were like, I believe they were like a play in some, in Egypt or in Greece and so forth.
Yes, I'm aware of that in Greece, that many of these plays were, like Shakespeare, were used to convey the true journey of the ego, through terrestrial and then through the spiritual. So, at that, it seemed as a Greece at that time was really primed to be able to, for him to be able to impart his knowledge. There were these vehicles that were present that he could use, instruments that he could use. There's something else that I wanted to emphasize is that he opened his school to anyone who was interested. He did not distinguish between male or female disciple. He did not say that one gender is more predisposed to learning spiritual teachings than the other. That was throughout his writings. That is never the case, and that's very heartening to know that. There was, in almost 2,500 years ago, it is quite a progressive thought.
That was specifically my comment
Mm-hmm.
I was going to make. If you went, if you came across some in your research about Pythagoras, including women, but now you said that he was open to both. His school was open to men and women, and that was ahead of his time. Then, do you know then if his among his disciples were some women interested in the mysteries?
So I especially don't know about the only female philosopher that's most prominent is Hypatia.
Mm.
But before that, between Pythagoras and Hypatia, all we know, at least through the writings and translations, is that both exoteric and esoteric teachings were open to all, and there was no distinction drawn between a male or female disciple, and no disciples turned away because of their gender. As opposed to more, it seems towards the end of Hypatia's when religion became more institutionalized, not just Christianity, but other religions too, that they started excluding women from participating in scriptures and learning. But before that, it seemed as though this whole line of Greek philosophers, that narrow-mindedness was seemed to be absent, at least in Greece, at least that I can say, based on the students' research. I cannot say much about either Egypt or other places because I haven't really dug deeper into that.
But it did not specifically mention women. That it included women, but it doesn't say specifically that.
So his translations specifically say that Pythagoras kept his school open to all men and women.
Okay, that's comforting then. I found his exoteric teachings very practical.
Yeah.
In ways that he recommended or suggested that men behave a certain way, that men never spoke evil when they were angry or things like that. They were very practical, and I think that was the exoteric part of his teachings, right?
Yeah, so, if you look at the Voice of the Silence, it says, right, that before you, in the seven virtues, 7 paramitas, it says before you take the first step on a ladder, you have to purify yourself, right? Pure thought. And so, in many ways, what Pythagoras was trying to do is use his exoteric teachings and precepts to prompt the students, the disciples, to purify themselves first before they become ready to receive the esoteric knowledge. And he was, as Kathy pointed out, like other philosophers, he was very strict in how people that ensure that people, his students live very simple lives, not lives of luxury, but simple lives. He specified he himself ate very simple, easy to digest food. He said that even when you're on your own, do not indulge in any shameful acts and words. So it's not that you do not speak shameful words in presence of others, but even when you're on your own, to be the same. He practiced strict and continuous meditation. So the one word he used in meditating is not just meditating a certain time of the day, but he said that you need to have a continuous train of thought on your inner self throughout the waking hours. And to do that, he said you have to lead a simple, very simple life. Where your needs are just what you need, and also in terms of how you treat your parents, how you treat your spouse, how you treat your family, he said, look upon your family as a divinity, and not just cohabitants. So he tried to teach his students to look at a divine and everything around them, and to practice this in the daily life. Yes, Kathy, yes.
And it's no wonder that that mode of living affected the wider community
Yes.
where he lived, especially if there's groups of people practicing in the same manner. That effect is multiplied. Mathematically.
Exactly. Yeah.
He proved it.
yeah. I guess that's mathematical too. Absolutely.
And he was such a model to go by. Nobody wanted to listen to him, though.
Exactly. So when he, after his 40-year journey of learning and initiation, when he returned to his hometown, he found that they had completely changed. That they were not willing to listen to any philosophy, or they were too engrossed in almost very materialistic, very life full of passions. And so after a couple of years, I'm not sure how many years he spent there, but he found only 1 or 2 disciples, and then he moved to Crotona, and he found that, southern Italy, that area had the right, almost was prepared for him to be able to use those instruments to set up the school. And one of his dreams was to set up a city, or what's what he calls city of souls, where it was not just a school, but the whole society was deeply immersed in spiritual learning. That was one of his dreams, and he really went about, achieving that. And if you look at, many of the translations really speak to the fact that wherever Pythagorean thought prevailed, you saw an erosion of terrestrial and earthly living. He saw that as replaced by higher learning. It's very heartening to hear that.
Yeah. But he has some of the same challenges that HPV had along the way. Nobody, in fact, even today, with all of the testing and verifying the secret doctrine that is going on, and not very many people following her. And so we got our challenges today.
Yes. In fact, even in ISIS Unveiled and Secret Doctrine, they pointed to the fact that many of the most advanced mathematicians dismissed Plato and Pythagoras completely because they couldn't understand it. You really have to be able to grasp, because what they taught was pure mathematics, as opposed to mathematics that we know in earthly life.
Yeah. And she said in her voice, dedicated to the few.
Exactly.
That was published before around 1900. So
yeah.
So also you said something about Nora O'Donnell made a comment to the graduating class that she gave a talk to, that you have to do in your privacy what you do in public. That is a test of your resolve, if you will.
Yes. I think I don't recall whether it's HVB or Judge who said that the inner voice, the inner witness is always watching you. So whether you're in public or you're by your own, you have to acknowledge that. And so you cannot escape any wrongdoings done in public, in private, which no one else knows. But your real self, real higher self, as witnesses or recorded it, at some point it'll come back to haunt you.
That's what Mother always said when I left the world. She said, you have to pay attention to that inner voice.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's what we're teaching too right now.
Yes.
So that's who we are, really. We have to we have to measure up to who we are.
Yep, exactly.
In our lower selves.
Thank you so much. That was a most excellent talk.
It was
Very good discussion.
very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.